Welcome to the Remington Podcast, where we take a deep dive into all things ammunition. I'm your host, Audrey Mays, and today I'm with the Research and Development Rifle Team with Logan Henry.
Good to be on.
And boss man John Langenfeld.
How you doing, everybody?
We are going to talk about actually a listener email. Listener Dakota emailed us and wanted to know the difference between a boat tail and a flat bottom. What makes them different, and why would you choose one versus the other? So I think we should start off with, what is a boat tail? Obviously, it's the bottom of a bullet, right? But John, what is a boat tail?
Yep, that's a start.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a great question, because you're going to read that usually when people are describing bullets, whether it's in loaded rounds or consumer, like reloading bullets. So you're talking around the area at the base of the bullet, down toward the heel, and and a flat base is just that when you come down from your bearing and you meet the corner of the heel, that it's just flat. It's a 90 degree. Where your boat-tailed projectiles, as you're coming down from the base of the bullet, you start an angle as you go toward the heel, and it slopes downward. So the heel of the bullet would actually be at a smaller diameter than full bearing. And the reason that this design is used in projectiles is because it reduces drag and increases the aerodynamics, the sleekness of the projectile, which, for most consumers, you're going to look at the ballistic coefficient, what we call the BC.
Okay.
And that BC number, the higher the number is, means that the bullet is more aerodynamic. And so you say, well, what does that mean? And it's not going to slow down as quickly once it exits the muzzle. And so its rate of deceleration is less. You could think of a vehicle. If you go ahead something like a real sleek Corvette, it's low to the ground and air should just flow right over it. And so if you're going 100 mile an hour and you let off the gas pedal, now it's
probably going to keep rocking.
You're decelerating. Okay. So that once the bullet leaves the muzzle, it's decelerating. And so if you take something, let's just say it's the same weight as a Corvette, but it's got a flat front end on it. Well, you're creating a surface now that is going to have more drag. There's the force against it from air is going to be higher, pushing in the opposite direction. So it's going to slow down quicker. So boat tails is one feature that you can use in a projectile shape that increases its aerodynamics, makes the ballistic coefficient higher, reduces drag. And the way that you can see that is if a person will go into ballistics calculators, there's, all kinds of them. We got them in the backs of our catalogs, but there's a bunch of them online. And if you'll go in and punch in for the same bullet weight and the same muzzle velocity and just change the ballistic coefficient numbers, you can chart out and you can see what that change in aerodynamic, what's that's doing for you and you can look at the table that it spits out and your muzzle velocity, and you'll see that it doesn't decelerate as quickly. Okay. The higher the ballistic coefficient, which if it doesn't decelerate as quickly means that it's got a shorter time of flight. You're going to get to your target quicker because you're not slowing down. Well, if you have a shorter time of flight, now you've also got less wind drift.
Okay. And for people who, a lot of people, use paper targets and see, where their bullet's hitting the target. There was a word that you guys brought up to me before called dispersion, and this would affect dispersion, yes?
It probably is not going to be your driving factor.
Okay.
So
what is dispersion?
So when we're talking about dispersion, we're talking about your actual group. What we call it, we call it accuracy. Yeah. Internally, everybody uses the term, how accurate is this? And from engineering, that accuracy and precision they're flipped the way we use them.
In your normal speak?
In this industry.
Yeah.
Yes. We call it accuracy, but it's actually precision.
Okay.
So you're talking about grouping. When we say dispersion, it's going to be what that group looks like. If you're aiming at the same place and you start shooting, you're going to have, bullets going and you end up with a group. So more dispersion, bigger group, less dispersion, smaller group.
Okay.
So, Yeah.
And then there's other way, here in the factory, let's say we've got something that's not shooting. We're also, and this gets into probably more technical terms, we're looking at dispersion on horizontal and vertical. We want to see a uniform group where our bullet holes, pretty much create a circle, where if we're horizontal, we're going to go, what's wrong? What's potentially creating horizontal dispersion or vertical dispersion? So you're going to see your group like this. So lots of factors that can go into that.
Okay.
Yep. We're looking for a normal distribution.
Right.
A normal distribution meaning that you're not influencing that dispersion by one factor or another, causing it to be more vertical or horizontal, and it all comes down to oscillations of your barrel. So there's a number of things that go into dispersion. But having a boat tail on a projectile is usually not one of the major things. I mean, I know that there's information out there around, flat base boat tail, short range distances, and that level of dispersion being better with flat base at shorter ranges, based on, how they come out of the barrel and yaw and different things like that. But, at the end of the day, I really don't care as long as it shoots good in my rifle.
Right.
And just because it's a flat base, if it don't like your rifle, doesn't mean that this boat tail over here that likes your rifle is going to shoot better for you.
It's going to be the fix-all.
Exactly. So, for me personally, I don't really get too wrapped up into having a boat tail or a flat base, depending on what my end goal requirements are.
Right.
If I'm looking for the highest BC long range projectile to shoot PRS and have minimal wind drift and that sort of thing, most of those bullets are already going to have boat tails on them.
Okay.
But that's how they get the high BC numbers out of them. And you're shooting at distances where the BC versus a flat base that has a lower, it's not as aerodynamic, you're going to see more divergence between the two, where one of them is going to retain their velocity more, and you're going to see that flatter trajectory.
Right. So that was my next question was, you talked about drag in BC. So does that affect, how long your projectile can maintain flatness? So when you lose velocity, it drops, correct, Logan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And so if you're reaching for something past 400 yards, be it a target or...
So you got to be real careful how you say that. So I don't know if you've ever seen the Mythbusters episode. Gravity works on everything the same way, regardless of how fast it's going.
Okay. That's true, yeah.
So they had a really good episode, and then going, we did this in college. We did it in one of our physics classes. We had a little cannon. So if I shoot a projectile horizontal, and I have a projectile here in my hand, if I shoot and drop this at the same time, just drop it to the ground, and they're at the same height, and I shoot this horizontal, these bullets will hit the ground at the same time.
Okay. I feel like I should know that from basic science, but
Yep. So that's gravity. Gravity's acting down. Now, how far that projectile traveled
is based on how fast it's going.
Well, I mean, it's going to have its deceleration. What that XY looks like. With time. That's going to go into your aerodynamics. But primarily, like, how far did it get? So like I said, pretty basic, but that's where it goes into that, your drag, more drag, less aerodynamics is what we would say doesn't shoot as flat, higher BC, velocity, all that goes, and there's other things that go into it besides BC, because you can overcome BC with velocity and it still be flat.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So boat tail versus flat bottom, it's really just what is the mixture and aerodynamics.
Aerodynamics.
And you can load can you load a flat bottom to have the same velocity as a boat tail? Like, that has nothing to do with it.
They can. I mean, you can absolutely have the same velocity.
Yeah. Okay.
100%.
Interesting.
So that's what, as John was saying, whenever you get out your ballistic calculator, we would encourage, you put your BC of your flat base bullet, and then you put your BC of your boat tail bullet at the same, and that's where you're going to see your difference. So you want the same velocity to get a real good comparison there. So,
is there any reason Logan would intentionally reach for a flat bottom bullet?
I wouldn't say that. I think either one could
get the job done.
Get the job done,
depending on what the job is.
I would say that if you're shooting within the range that the divergence of the trajectory doesn't matter.
Okay. Yeah.
That as a general rule of thumb, like I said, if you go out and you research this and bench thrusters and things like that, you might be able to tune your rifle quicker, or maybe it's a little more forgiving to get there with flat base.
Okay.
So again, there are more factors that go into it than just the bullet.
Yes.
You know, the quality of the rifle, the load, the harmonics, and things of that nature. But if you were to generalize that statement,
Right.
then that would be the only way that I would say that if you had a specific purpose that was dispersion driven and was within an area that your ballistic coefficient wasn't as important, then a flat base bullet might be more optimal for what you're doing.
Okay. And you're not, I mean, there's just so much that can happen to a projectile or a cartridge. We just talked about it before. There's internal ballistics, external ballistics, and terminal performance.
Yep.
That you're all looking at. And, you know, we load a lot of hunting cartridges here. So terminal performance is
It's very
pretty
important.
peak.
Yeah.
You know, we need it to perform the way that we need it to take care of that animal downrange. What we listed like a little bit of things that we pay attention to a lot, meaning like jacket material and antimony content. How important would you say that like that is when you're trying to make a new bullet design?
Oh, those are all your knobs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So once you've defined your end goal of what you want this bullet to do once it hits, then you can tweak the variables of the geometry, outside, inside, thickness of the jacket, hardness of the lead. There's other things that we can do up around the nose portion of it, as far as what we call the meplet, call it your tip. You know, how big that diameter is, whether it's a hollow point, whether it's tipped, whether it's got, you know, skives. So think of it this way. If you've got a perforated notebook,
Okay.
you go pull your paper out of it, it's going to tear down that line every time. And if you don't have one and you go to tear a piece of paper out, it's usually just kind of
wonky.
jagged and random and whatnot.
Yeah.
So we can do things to bullets up in the nose portion in those jackets to essentially perforate those jackets in a way that when they open and that jacket tears or the way it rolls, that it does so in the same fashion every time. It's a controlled failure, so to speak,
Okay.
versus random unperforated. So we can do things to these bullets up in here to skive them or put what we call nose cuts. You ever look at a golden saber?
Yes. They're
Look
like,
at an
they're
AccuTip,
twisted. Yeah.
you can see what we call spiraled nose cuts. And so that starts the tear. So when that bullet starts to open, that's where it's going to tear every time. So there's a number of things that you can do in order to get the end result. I think that, in my opinion, one thing that I've seen with my career at Remington is I would encourage consumers to, one, understand what do you want that bullet to do in the end, and then what kind of options. Educate yourself on the options that you can use to reach that goal. You know, I don't want to shoot a bullet that's designed for coyotes. That, you know, what does that mean? Well, a coyote's a whole lot smaller than an elk.
Right.
Penetration differences, energy
Expansion.
transfers, rate of expansion is going to be a whole lot different than what I want a bullet to do if I'm shooting big, heavier boned game that I need deeper penetration, things like that. So, you know, go through your catalogs, you know, read about that. You can't go like, and you can get pretty general. You can just shoot Core Lock for everything and be done with it, not worry about it.
Yeah.
But if you get like we do and we're like, oh, well, I need that bullet to do this and that bullet to do that. And, you know, but that's just kind of what makes the world go round. That's why we've got all the different offerings and they work in different ways. And some of them are a little more optimized for a particular use than others.
But they're all quality. They're all just, they have different end uses. Logan, John mentioned something, you know, back to bullet shape, basically. We were talking about previously something called an ogive and how, you know, differences in that. You brought some examples here. I have a drawing that I will make prettier and put right here. What is an ogive and how do they differentiate from each other?
Your ogive is going to be, so you have I guess you're drawing there. So you've got your flat portion of your bullet. So your ogive is going to be your section in front of that. I'm kind of doing my YMCA over here. So like your core lock. So we've got basically 3 different types of ogive. So you've got a tangent ogive, which would be like your basic core lock. So it's going to be, if you look at Audrey's picture or whatever we put on the screen here, it's going to be a little fatter.
It's like rounder almost.
Yes, that's correct.
As it comes down to full bearing.
Right, to the full.
It's almost
diameter.
a seamless transition.
Okay, from tip to
ogive as it comes down into that full bearing. You really don't see a transition line.
Right.
Yeah.
It flows into it. So think of a tangent line. Tangent lines, basically, if you look at it, had a line that was tangent to a circle, it's not going into it at a sharp angle.
Yeah.
It's flat with it.
That's good to know.
It's going to meet the contour.
Okay.
So then you've got a secant. So secant's going to be like your core lock tipped. So it's going to be a little more of a sharp angle. You're going to be able to tell that difference between your bearing surface and your ogive pretty clearly. I've got it here. You can see that the angle radius is quite a bit steeper on your secant. The difference in those is on your secant ogive, you should see a better BC, as we've been talking about in this. So your difference between your core lock tipped, we've talked about how the tip does additionally make BC, but that difference in that ogive probably, it makes quite a bit of difference. So then we don't have an example here today. You've got what we call a hybrid, something that I would say a pretty well-known one that's got it in the name is the Burger hybrid. So it's going to start out with a tangent. So it's going to match, as our core lock does here, to the bearing quite a bit better.
Pretty angular and pointy.
Yes. And then it's going to get, as you said, much more angular and pointy. So it's got a combination of both of those.
So if you were to go in and say, well, Logan, why would I want a secant over a tangent? And why would I want a hybrid over the other two? How do you answer that question?
You knew that was coming, didn't you?
Well, there's probably 2 factors that I would say here. So you're talking about BC, as we spoke earlier. BC, we've talked a little bit about inside 300 yards. You're not going to see a whole lot of difference. So it's probably one or the other. What's your preference? You're also, whenever you get into that, now there's differing data you can look at different places. It's commonly, I would say, thought of that your tangent probably is easier as you're doing. So reloaders, we do it here occasionally, a load length ladder test. So we're trying alternate loaded lengths. You would typically find that accuracy, precision technically, as we talked about here, is going to be easier to find with your tangent ogive bullet. So it's thought of that your secant bullets are a little harder, more finicky based on loaded length and loaded length variations, that you're going to see your dispersion increase a little more if you have differences in those loaded lengths.
Okay.
So the hybrid there, as we see in a lot of match bullets these days, so it's supposed to bridge the gap between the two. So it's going to better align with the bore and grooves as you shoot it with that tangent, and then the secant ogive portion of that, which is in front of where your alignment would be, is going to help you get that better BC for those long range shots.
Again, higher BC, less air drag, ?
Yep.
Correct.
It's a good blend.
Yeah.
You're trying to be less finicky, easy to tune, but yet pump the BC up.
Yeah. And bullet shape makes a huge difference.
There's a whole world out there of just specific design engineers that are dedicated to projectile design, projectile flight, drag. If people don't know, go look up what spark ranges are. And if you haven't seen that, look at the pictures. They're pretty cool stuff of taking photographs of the shadows of projectiles and the drag and the drag behind them. And it was these, big, long ranges. I think there was only a few spark ranges. I don't know if there's any left, maybe one in the country. But you had these pictures and you'd take photographs of you could see the flight and all that. But like I said, anyways, you can see the air coming off of them. And, at the point you see the air. Yeah.
Like they do with cars in commercials.
Pretty close to it. Yes.
Yeah.
It was the study of flight, and you're looking at, theoretical, drag based on equations of motion that goes back to Newton's laws versus actual data that how good is the agreement between the theoretical and matching drag profiles. So there's all these. I think there's like I'm not going to quote that number. I'll get corrected. Anyways, there's a number of drag profiles, and when you have a projectile shape, you closely match it up best you can to the drag profile, and that's how we estimate, your trajectory and everything. But yes, it's you could I could very easily dedicate an entire engineer to just bullets.
Shoot, bullet shape.
Just
not even content. Like
bullet design, expansion, terminal performance. Dispersion, the whole thing, materials. I mean, oh my gosh, we haven't even talked about brass jackets, copper jackets, monolithic bullets that are solid copper, brass projectiles that don't expand at all. So at the end of the day, it's all about what do you need that bullet to do when it hits?
Right.
Yeah.
Or does it just need to be
anneals even? I don't think we threw in anneals earlier. Anneals.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are a big part too.
So changing the microstructure of the grain size of the jacket to make it softer or harder, essentially, and how it opens. So.
Well, we're just going to have another episode. That's what it sounds like.
I tell you what, like I said, this new 400 Legend bullet that we got coming, I know Leland gets up here and he gives you all the nitty gritty details. He'll be primed for talking about bullet design and everything that he went through for the new 400 Legend bullet. So the new core locked.
Can't wait for that one. It's going to be like an hour long.
Oh, probably will be. Yeah. You have to put him on a timeline.
Yeah.
And he'll have it all. He'll have everything from his dispersion and his shape and depending on if you want to know why he did what he did and also terminal performance. It's got to toe the line. It's got to look like this mushroom here in the catalog, deadliest mushroom in the woods. So we've got him kind of, I don't want to call it worked up, but we're like,
he's pretty hyped.
As our samples are getting created and things like that. I teased him. I asked him the other day. I said, "Have you ever seen Hatari?" Now, there's a John Wayne movie called Hatari, and they're in Africa, and a guy named Pockets makes a rocket, but he doesn't watch the rocket get shot because he runs behind a tree and looks the other way. And after he shoots it, he didn't get to see his rocket work. And so for the whole next day or whatever, he's walking around the compound pouting and everything, asking John Wayne to tell him the story. He's like, "How did the rocket fly?" And so they tell him until they're like, they're just tired of it. They're like, "Pockets, come on." So I've been telling him. He's like, "You're like Pockets. You're going to be like, how did it shoot, guys?"
Right. He's too invested. He's going to be like, "I don't want to watch."
Yeah. Did it shoot good? No, it'll be fine.
It's going to be great. I feel like this episode has really set the stage for more to come about us deep diving.
Oh yeah,
into bullet shape and bullet design.
Yep. So you can branch this off into various categories and toughness.
And for users who are really interested in this stuff, a good reference is Brian Litz. He has a lot of very good books that explain this in extreme detail and probably above what some people want to know.
Yep.
But very good things from Brian Litz.
You're going to see a lot of the math behind that and dispersion and normal distributions and all that kind of stuff. I think for when I try to explain to somebody about bullets, looking at either a catalog, if you got a reloading manual sitting around, get on the bullet company's websites, but you start looking at section projectiles and see what the internals of them look like, and that's easy to explain. What are you looking at? Flat, boat tail.
Yep.
Just. There's a wealth of information out there. We put quite a bit in each of the catalogs, and you can see the differences in PLR and Sirocco. And but that's why we do this, is we section them so that we can educate people. And if anybody's got any questions, it sounds like hopefully we've answered the questions of this consumer. That go ahead and send us more of them.
Yeah, definitely. And you can be like me and know what these shapes are and what they're called, and maybe not necessarily that they all relate to each other and what they affect. And please send us those questions because we'd love to answer them too. Well, thanks for being here, guys. Again, we're going to have you back for another episode. So there you have it, guys. Remington is on the rise. Like, comment, subscribe, and be sure to share this podcast with your hunting or shooting buddies. If you have any questions for me or the engineers here, you can email us at podcast@remington.com. Thanks for listening.